it shouldn't be entered into Parliament as a bill, and if it is, it really shouldn't state that this is what the treaty says, because
Yeah.
that's extremely problematic to have fiction enshrined as fact in our legislation, and even to be going into debate and select committee, which the government did commit to do in the coalition agreement. But we need to be clear as well that this is a government bill. It's not a private member's bill. So the government, all three parties of the coalition, have to agree to what's included in the bill, as you'll see on ACT's campaign website there. So we also don't want to overly focus on ACT because it is a government decision ultimately, and the Prime Minister's responsible for that, for what the bill actually looks like,
Yeah.
and whether or not it claims to be saying what the treaty says. So we've asked that if it is introduced, that there's a conscience vote is allowed, because this is a really big question for all New Zealanders around the principle of truth in our legislation.
I'll come back to the conscience vote because I was going to ask you about that. What you're basically saying, it sounds to me, is that David Seymour saying this is how I want the country to be. And to be honest, I couldn't think of anything worse than basing a country on David Seymour's principles and ideas around what it should be. Now, I know you don't need to speak to that because, you know, I'm the guy who's going to pass opinions, and you guys probably don't want to get involved in that. I do want to ask you a question though. We've had Moana Tufari on a couple of times, and you mentioned that the meaning has flipped in this. It seems to me as well, from my very limited understanding, but seeking out expertise like yourself and Moana and other people, and Professor Margaret Mutu, who's been on with us, is that when these things were signed, in the 1800s, and the English, the British, Europeans were in such a minority, it was almost Māori welcoming, like co-governance. It was Māori saying to the British, you can come to the table. It was actually a way that Māori allowed the British to be involved, the English, the settlers to be involved. And as soon as, Pākehā became the majority, including today, it's like, well, let's reverse all these things because we're in the majority now, and we want it our way. Again, going back to that legal document, if your personal circumstances change, it doesn't mean you get to therefore change what this original agreement was. Are we thinking about this correctly? Are we seeing it correctly that once Europeans sort of became the majority, they're like, well, thanks very much for allowing us to the table, now we'll take over?
You're just, to your point initially about the resemblance of the principles to ACT's preferences. So, we're limiting what we're speaking about, as you say, to our role as translators,
Yeah,
and
100%.
that role. But we have noted in our letter that, because an important translation ethic is that there's no biases or preferences or personal interpretation entered into the translation. And although you wouldn't jump to that conclusion, obviously, because of all the evidence we've outlined about the various other breaches of the ethical standards of translation, and given that the proposed treaty principles are not derived from Te Tiriti, as it has been stated that they are, and that they actually look like ACT Party political preferences and policies, we have noted that it's possible that the ethical standards of objectivity and impartiality have not been adhered to in this translation. And in terms of that shift in the dominance, that's not something that we've addressed as translators, but if I can just switch to speaking for myself briefly. I'm a Pākehā New Zealander who's been fortunate enough to learn te reo and, develop a career in this space. And it'd certainly be my observation that, the Māori didn't really need, they were dominant. There was several 100,000 Māori at the signing of Te Tiriti, and so, it really was giving permission for, for the British to create government to manage their own people and processes. And the treaty guarantee was that Māori would retain tino rangatiratanga alongside. So, yeah, I think we are in a situation where obviously the power imbalance is very different these days, and so that leads to a very different conversation and situation and decision-making process, I guess. And so, yeah, my perspective would be that that's definitely playing out here, because, you know, one party to the treaty changing the meaning and application of it without full agreement and engagement with the other party, you know, that's not what you do in a legal agreement. And
No,
the power
exactly
dynamics
right.
make that at least look like a political possibility at the moment, which is very concerning for anyone that's interested in good governance and upholding agreements.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, not to oversimplify it, I don't get to tell the bank that I've decided to change how my mortgage is structured without a conversation with them. It just seems a no-brainer to me.